strikes on Iran. Early this morning, Israel conducted unprecedented strikes on Iran. Apart from civilians, the strikes killed senior military officials and scientists as well. And now the Iranian government has vowed to retaliate, as if there already was not enough going on in the Middle East, particularly with Israel's war in the Gaza Strip. Now, the United States, for its part, has denied collaboration in the Israeli attacks, but the US president has supported Israel's unilateral action. So, by launching a so-called preemptive strike on Iran, has Israel effectively preempted the prospect of any sort of peaceful solution? Because the issue of whether or not the Iranians should be permitted to pursue a civilian nuclear enrichment program remains a concern. And with that, let's also take you through how the Israeli government justified these actions as necessary to prevent Iran from advancing its nuclear capabilities. In response, Iran has in fact vowed retaliation. Take a look at the key sites that have been struck as Tehran Research Reactor. This facility is known for its research and medical isotope production, was heavily damaged in the strikes. The Natanz enrichment facility, one of Iran's primary uranium enrichment sites, Natanz suffered significant damage, potentially setting back Iran's nuclear program. The Fordo enrichment facility, another critical enrichment site, Fordo was also hit, with reports indicating extensive damage to its underground infrastructure. The Bushehr nuclear power plant, the only operational nuclear power plant in Iran, Bushehr, was targeted, raising concerns about potential radiation leaks as well. The Arak heavy water reactor was another site that was struck. This facility, which produces heavy water for nuclear reactors, was struck, causing substantial damage. Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center, this is a major hub for Iran's nuclear research and development. Isfahan was also targeted during these strikes. Let's also take you through all the losses that Iran has suffered apart from the strikes that happened on its key nuclear facilities. Its top leadership has been wiped out. Mohammad Bagheri, Iran's Armed Forces Chief of Staff, Major General Hossein Salami, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Commander, Major General Rashid, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps official, Mohammad Mahdi. He's a nuclear scientist who was also killed. In fact, Feridun Abbasi, who's a nuclear scientist, was also killed during these air strikes. All right, I'm joined in by Leveran. We are also expecting other guests on the broadcast right now, but Leveran, let me tell you, is a columnist and former coordinator of the Israel-India Parliamentary Friendship League. Many thanks to you, Lev, for joining in. Lev, many experts are now questioning the escalatory nature of these strikes. There are a host of questions, but to begin with, what gives Israel the confidence to carry out these airstrikes on Iran, given that several security experts have said that Israel is not even having the kind of nuclear capabilities that Iran currently commands?
I think for most Israelis, once a very soft watchdog like IAEA wrote that Iran is not does not comply the nuclear safeguards, it was a matter of time before something should have happened. One thing that could happen is that Americans and Iranians, they sit in Oman and they reach an agreement. And then, of course, Israel is very obedient to America. Israel would do nothing. But once even the Americans gave up the Oman initiative, and they felt that the Iranians do not come to the negotiation table with a modest, humble way, but in a way that they are like a superpower and they have the right to have nuclear capabilities. It was a matter of time before Israel will attack Iran or Americans will attack Iran.
That's interesting. And I want to bring in Sushant Sareen, who I can see has also joined in. Sushant, thank you for joining in. But how do you weigh in on this anti-airstrike that's taken place, do you even call it a unilateral action, as Iran has suspected that this can't be a unilateral action? We've seen different kind of responses coming in. On one hand, you had the US president saying that while negotiations was on, he was against such a strike. On the other hand, in the most latest interview to ABC News, he's gone on to say that this was an excellent strike and that Iran was given 60 days. Today is the 61st, and that they should have come up with the deal.
Akansha, I think it's inconceivable to think that the Americans were not in the loop and to some extent were not complicit in these particular strikes. It just cannot happen simply because, and these strikes have been spectacularly successful. I think Israel planned these very, very meticulously over months, if not years. And the way they have taken out the top leadership of the armed forces of Iran. They have struck all those facilities which they were targeting for or wanted to target for many years. And the fact that they have, in a sense, demolished or destroyed Iran's capabilities to strike back. We haven't seen any strikes from Iran as yet, apart from some drones which they've chucked. But even those had seemed to have come down, and we'll have to wait. I think 1 or 2 days we'll have to wait to see whether Iran has something left in its arsenal or only empty rhetoric. So Israel planned it really well. I think the Americans were very much in the loop. And I dare say, despite all the condemnations from some of the Arab states, I don't think they're going to be shedding any tears that Iran's nuclear facilities have been taken out and its nuclear program has been destroyed. Number one. Number two, I think despite all their condemnations, they to some extent would be complicit in the airstrikes, at least that were carried out by Israel, because their airspace would have been used in most cases. There is no way, apart from the Syrian airspace, which is in a sense not defended anymore. Jordan certainly would have some, air defense systems. The Saudis would have them. And I'm sure some of those territories would have been brought into use. And yet, if the Israelis were able to carry out these strikes, then I would imagine there's been a wink, nudge kind of a complicity from some of these countries as well. They will obviously deny it in public. But how can such a strike, such an audacious strike, I would say, and I think this is what shock and awe looks like.
Absolutely. Audacious indeed. Lev, how do you respond to what the point that Sushant is making? Because many are saying that this is not just a win-win in terms of the damage that has been caused to Iran, not just in terms of the nuclear capabilities, but also in terms of the top military leadership. But do you also see this now with regards to concerns of a wider Middle East conflict? Is this now going to divide the Islamic world even further? Because you have the OIC nations, many of them are not standing by Iran's side. You have Jordan, you have Syria, yes, but do you see this now driving a wedge even further?
So the Middle East or West Asia is the Mecca of the doublespeak. It doesn't matter what they say in the Emirates or Bahrain or Saudi Arabia. Okay. They are very happy that Iran was humiliated. There is no question about it. And for them, the Israeli nuclear capabilities is not a threat. They know that Israel is not an enemy of the moderate Sunni countries. And with many of them, we already have a formal peace. So if we compare what Iran was even 1 year back with the Assad family and Hezbollah and the Houthis and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza, and what is Iran now, they hold a very sticky wicket. And they know that in a way, it is not only that they humiliated, in a way, Israel feels that even if Iran shows all its capacities, it was good to strike Iran.
Okay.
And maybe...
I'm sorry to interrupt you there. In fact, I'm getting in breaking inputs as we speak. Prime Minister Modi has responded, or rather reacted to the phone call that he received from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's taken to X to share what he's had to say. He's saying that we received a phone call from Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. He briefed me on the evolving situation. I shared India's concerns and emphasized the need for early restoration of peace and stability in the region. That's Prime Minister's message coming out loud and clear. I want to bring in Sushant. Sushant, Prime Minister's concerns, of course, go a long way because remember, he's not only in the good offices of Israel, but also in the good offices of Iran, given our time-tested ties, how crucial Iran has been to India in terms of as a fuel supplier, also in terms of our energy needs. India did not give in to the kind of pressure that US had mounted on us when it came to meeting our own energy needs, especially from Iran. But having said that, the kind of message that's come in from Prime Minister Modi, what does it speak of India's concerns right now as this conflict carries the potential of spilling forward?
Akansha, one, I think the assumption that this conflict will spill over and into a wider Middle Eastern conflict, I have my doubts. I don't think the Arab states are wanting to get involved on the side of Iran. And the so-called axis of resistance that Iran had constructed has crumbled. Hamas is finished, Hezbollah has been virtually finished. Lebanon is not in the fight anymore. Syria, there's been a regime change.
True.
I don't think new regime. It's the Houthis left, but the Houthis also are able to strike at Israel on the basis of systems which Iran gives them. And if Iran doesn't have the systems to strike, I don't see what damage the Houthis can do. And in any case, they are not very popular with the rest of the Arab states. So I don't see this spill over into a larger conflict, but India's concerns are twofold. One is, of course, the fact that, we have to do some kind of monkey balancing between a very fabulous relationship that we have with Israel and, of course, a very important relationship that we have with Iran. So we'll have to do some kind of virtue signaling, some kind of monkey balancing. And frankly, I think everybody understands where we are coming from. Second is more serious, which is that even if Iran remains in the fray, there is a concern that our energy security, not just in terms of supplies, but also in terms of pricing of energy, which we buy from the Middle East, will spike. And that causes a problem for us. And we have a diaspora in the region. Plus, if trade routes start getting disrupted, then that's a third whammy for us. So there is that particular concern that we have on that particular part. But look, we are not buying any oil from Iran. We stopped that many years ago. After the US imposed certain sanctions, our oil supplies from Iran are virtually zero. And we've shifted our oil purchases to Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and some of the other countries. We are not buying much oil from Iran anyway. So Iran per se does not affect us. But if supposing Iran was to block the Straits of Hormuz, if that was to happen, it would impact on us. If the Houthis were to continue doing what they've been doing and escalate it to whatever extent they can and the Bab al-Mandab, then that affects our trade flows. That's already started being affected. That's already raised costs for us. And then, of course, if other Arab countries are targeted, then we have a diaspora out there, then that becomes a problem. But I don't see Iran attacking the other Arab countries because that would be uniting everybody against Iran. And I don't think that's a very wise thing for Iran to do at this point in time.
Rather, it would be looking for support. We wonder where, the ones who are currently supporting Iran, whether it is Syria or Jordan. In fact, Jordan has, sort of distanced itself, but Syria is not even in a position to come to Iran's aid. But I want to bring in Lev on that part. Having said that, Lev, is Israel in a position to open a fresh new front? Because you already have the war going on in Gaza, and as I said, that those nuclear capabilities which Iran still has are not the case with Israel. For how long can you sustain this conflict without the US assistance?
The conflict in Gaza is a real domestic feud within Israel. We have a big chunk within Israel who says enough is enough. This war is for 1.5 years, and we need to bring back the hostages. And some pollsters even say that it is above 50% of Israelis who are against the current government of Netanyahu. But once we come to Iran, who actually wants the annihilation of Israel and has these capabilities, and really has this political libido to harm Israel, in this, let's say, in the basic politics of Israel, fighting Iran is a consensus. There is no, even I can say that Netanyahu was scolded for many years that he's so soft on Iran. So in a way, it is like a monkey on the shoulder of Netanyahu that he took off with this attack on Iran.
Professor Hamid Musavi, who is the Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of Tehran, has also joined in. Thank you so much, Professor Musavi, for joining in. How do you weigh in on the attack that's taken place? Many are saying that this is a sort of a double whammy. Not only is the military leadership wiped out, the senior ones, and of course the nuclear facilities, but this is also weakening Iran's position even further, given that Iran's allies have already been wiped out, largely whether it is Hamas, Hezbollah and the Houthis to a great extent.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. So I think the attack was very surprising. I think most people expected the Israelis to attack perhaps in the fall after the snapback mechanism is triggered by the Europeans and the Security Council. However, right now, it was very surprising considering the fact that Iran-US negotiations were ongoing. And actually, Iran was scheduled for the next round of talks with the Americans actually on Sunday. So I think the Israeli attack actually killed any prospects or chances for diplomacy. Now, I know that Donald Trump has tweeted that, well, it's 61 days and 60 days have passed, but we have to remember that the original nuclear deal took 2 years to negotiate. So I think this attack has essentially wiped out any sort of negotiated settlement. Now, from here on, if Israel continues these attacks, I think the situation will escalate greatly because Iran does not have any choice but to respond militarily.
Right. In fact, we're getting in some breaking inputs right now as we speak. What we are learning is that the International Atomic Energy Agency is all set to convene its extraordinary board meeting on Monday following the Israel attack today. And I want to bring in Sushant on that note. Sushant, the IAEA, of course, is going to be mulling over a response in terms of how they can censure Iran. But what is the role out here? Can IAEA sort of ease the tensions that only seem to be escalating by the hour?
No, I don't think so. I have serious doubts of the IAEA. I think it's again going to be a lot of the typical multilateral hand-wringing and virtue signaling from some of these groups. Maybe they will take a few pot shots at Iran, that Iran wasn't living up to its deal, wasn't living up to its commitment. But look, the point is we just don't have a complete appreciation of how badly hit Iran's nuclear facilities are. So one is that. Secondly, what exactly is Iran's capacity to hit back? For the dilemma for Iran, and as an outsider, I can say that, maybe Professor Musavi can shed more light. The dilemma for Iran is that if Iran does nothing, then there is huge problems for Iran, both for the country as well as for the regime. And if it wants to do something, what can it do? What is its capability? Does it have the missile systems to target Israel? Will it target, say, the American bases? If they target the Americans as they have been threatening, then that pulls in the Americans into a direct fight with Iran. Would Iran want the Americans to jump into a fight at this point in time? I have serious doubts. Would they want the Saudis, for example, if they were to attack the Saudis, would they want the Saudis or the Emirates or some of these other Arab states to jump in on the side of Israel, or even on their own accord target Iran? I don't think so. So if Iran does not have a long-range strike capability, then how does it fight with Israel?
Right.
It cannot send its troops. It can't send ground troops. That will be like a turkey shoot. So that is not possible. So Iran's options are kind of getting limited.
I want to bring in. I want to bring in Professor Musavi on that note because Professor, is Iran finding itself extremely isolated? I think Sushant has highlighted a very valid point over there. And look at the 2015 nuclear deal. Backing the United States are the only three European partners who are still part of the deal. You have the UK, you have the France, you have Germany, but and they are all pushing for this resolution against Iran. And as much as I don't know how much of a power does a multilateral resolution like the one that's going to be passed by IAEA have, but they're saying that it's going to be the strongest in 2 decades. What are the options for Iran right now?
Yes, I do agree with the other guests that Iran is in a difficult position. If Iran does not respond, then Iran's deterrence will be harmed. I mean, this was a very large-scale attack, and essentially Iran has no choice but to respond. But at the same time, I think Iran does not want a full-scale war. So it's very difficult to respond, but at the same time to keep it limited in a way that does not escalate. And at the same time, I think Iran does not want a war with the United States. Now, the Israelis have said that they fully coordinated this attack with the Americans. However, I think Iranian officials thus far have been very careful in not pointing fingers towards the Americans. And that's why I think an attack on American bases is very unlikely. Regarding the issue of allies, as you mentioned, Iran's relations with Europe right now are not very good. However, Iran does have the support of Russia and China. Now, that support is mainly in the Security Council, but we'll have to wait and see how successful Iran's attack will be.
Absolutely. I want to bring in one of the historic angles, and in fact, I want to also close with thoughts over there as far as Lev is concerned. Lev, many have been now going back and alluding to for nations that formed a pact of intelligence sharing, economic cooperation, even trade pact that goes all the way to the 1958 pact of Trident that involved Turkey, Iran and Israel. What has really led to this kind of downhill as far as the bilateral relationship between Israel and Iran is concerned? Not to forget the role that the United States has played, because remember, we all talk about how during the Cold War era, Iran was very much an ally to the United States.
As far as Israelis are concerned, we love the Iranians. And we love Iranian food and Iranian people. And when you meet Iranians in exile in London, in Paris, in Mumbai, in Pune, you see how easily Israelis and Iranians are getting as good friends. So as far as we are concerned, it is not the Iranians, because with the Iranians we had a very good connection until 1979, sorry. It is the regime that is anti-Israeli, that is also anti-India as far as Kashmir is concerned. And with the regime, we have the problem. I think Iranians are still extremely popular in Israel.
Would Professor Musavi want to share his thoughts over there? Because I can't help but share these dates with you. Iran had supplied Israel with crude oil, particularly after 1967 Six-Day War, when many Arab nations imposed their boycotts on Israel, and it was Iran that had come to its rescue.
So yes, Professor, it's true that during the Pahlavi era, the relations were much better between Iran and Israel. But we have to remember, even during the Pahlavi era, Iran did not vote for Resolution 181 of the UN General Assembly, which wanted to partition Palestine. And actually, Iran voted against that with other Muslim countries. After 1979, of course, Iran-Israel relations had been much worse. But with regards to the issue of loving Iranians, I don't think the mood in Tehran, if you ask most people, they will not have a very positive view of Israel, especially with what was done last night. Right. There were civilian casualties, women and children also died. So I think it's a difficult situation.
I want to give closing thoughts to Sushant Sareen. Sushant Sareen, now, first of all, do you agree that it is United States that stands to gain out of this entire situation? Not to forget, particularly Donald Trump, who we've seen during his previous presidency, the kind of crippling sanctions he had imposed on Iran, and one can't help but, in fact, go back into history of what happened in 2017 up until 2019.
I think the people who really gain are the Israelis, because if they have been able to take out Iran's nuclear facilities, I think the Israelis can breathe a lot easier than what they have been able to do for many, many years while the Iranian nuclear program was going on. And secondly, if they've been able to take out some of the missile facilities and other offensive capabilities of Iran, then again, that's something that Israel will be very happy with. And then, of course, I would imagine that despite, like I said earlier, despite all their condemnation, many of the Arab states also, who were pretty spooked by Iran's nuclear program, they were trying to paper it over, trying to improve their relations with Iran, but nevertheless, they remained very, very concerned about Iran going nuclear. I think they would also be kind of happy about it. The US, of course, has a finger in every pie and a foot in every region. So the US, of course, will have its own axe to grind. Fair enough. But I think by and large, the big loser, unless Iran can really pull off something, it's going to be the Iranian regime. Maybe not so much the Iranian people, but certainly the Iranian regime.
Right. It's also a day to remind the US president that America is first, and perhaps he also needs to be focusing on the protests that seem to be ballooning by the day within his country.